There is a line of tracks in Siberian snow. Each print is wider than a dinner plate. They run straight past a burning alien lander, through the wreckage and out the other side, and not one stride is broken. Whatever made them did not run. It did not circle. It had rounds to finish. If you want more stories where humanity wins the strange way, hit like, subscribe, and share this with someone who thinks the cold is empty. Drop a comment when you figure out why he never sped up. Now pull your hood tight, because we are walking into the Ushiery taiga, and it is 40 below out there. The Soren Compact had conquered 40 worlds without ever fighting a war, and they were very proud of that. Their method was simple. Every biosphere, they believed, was a ladder. At the top of that ladder sat one organism that every other organism watched. Take that organism, control it, display it, and the whole ladder came down quietly. It had worked on 40 worlds. Overseer Kel Draven had personally signed 31 of those surrenders, and he had never once had to raise his voice. He stood now on the command deck of the survey vessel Long Patience, looking down at a white curve of a planet, and he was in an excellent mood. "Analyst Rowe, the apex organism." Rowe stepped forward. Rowe was small for a Sauron, permanently anxious and extremely good at his job, which had never once helped him. "Overseer. The dominant terrestrial predator of the northern landmass is a striped ambush hunter. Adult males reach roughly 600 pounds. Home range up to 1,000 square miles. Solitary, territorial. No pack structure, no communication network, no coordination of any kind. Excellent. No pack means no reinforcement. Yes, Overseer, and our data." Rowe hesitated because this was the part he did not like saying out loud. "Our data is theirs, Overseer. The local species has published everything. Population counts, tracking records, dietary studies, movement maps. It is freely available. They wrote it themselves and gave it away." Draven found this delightful. "They cataloged their own apex for us." "They did. Then we will thank them for it later." "Landing site," Rowe brought up the survey. "The southeastern mountain range, dense conifer forest, deep snow, minimal population density. Our thermal survey returns almost nothing living across 400,000 hectares. It is, by our metrics, the emptiest defended landmass on the planet." That last sentence was wrong in a way that would take about 9 hours to explain to him, because the Ushiery taiga is not empty. It is cold, and cold hides things. Everything that lives there has spent thousands of generations learning to hold its heat inside its own body. Which means a thermal survey run by a species from a warm world looks at that forest and sees a rock. Sauron instruments were beautifully built and completely mistuned, and nobody on that deck knew it. 400 kilometers below, at the edge of a frozen river valley, a research station was having generator trouble. It was 6 prefabricated buildings, a fuel shed, a dish tower, and a snow berm that got taller every year because nobody had ever agreed whose job it was to move it. The sign at the gate said Sikhot Field Station, and under that, in smaller letters, somebody had burned into the wood with a soldering iron. It said, "Please close the gate. The wind is not your friend." Walt Brody had run the place for 22 winters. He was 61, built like a wood stove, and had not hurried since he was 30. He was standing over the backup generator with a wrench and a thermos, and he was losing. Roy Tibbett stuck his head out of the workshop. Roy was the mechanic, which at this station meant he was also the plumber, the electrician, and the person who decided when something was truly dead. He had kept the same snowcat alive for 11 years with hose clamps, stove bolts, and personal spite. "It is the fuel line again," Roy said. "It is always the fuel line." "Then why did you ask?" "Because I like hearing it confirmed by a professional." Inside the main hut, Nora Quint was thawing her tranquilizer kit next to the stove. "Because at 40 below, drugs freeze, and so do the hands that hold them." Nora was the station veterinarian. She had a very dry voice and had once talked a man out of shock by insulting his boots. Dean Holloway came in with an armload of firewood and no ability to be quiet about anything. Dean handled logistics, supply runs, and every conversation in the building. He had been in the Army. He mentioned this roughly once a day, and he had appointed himself the unofficial spokesperson for everybody in the station who did not want to talk. "Snow is coming sideways again," he announced. "It is always coming sideways," Nora said. Yes, but today it has enthusiasm. Sam Prout sat at the corner table with 200 trail sensor files and a look of quiet despair. Sam was the newest. This was his first winter, and he had discovered in the last 3 weeks that the taiga does not care how many books you have read. He had frostnip on 2 fingers and a growing suspicion that everyone else here was slightly insane. And at the far end of the table, Ellie Marsh had not said anything in about 40 minutes. Ellie was the station's tiger biologist. She was the quietest person in the building and the only one everybody actually listened to. She had spent 9 winters reading Snow. She could look at a print and tell you the weight of the animal, the direction of its interest, and whether it had eaten in the last 2 days. She had never once raised her voice at a colleague, an animal, or a broken machine, which Dean found genuinely unsettling. She turned her laptop around. "Sam, come look at this." Sam came. On the display was a single frame from a trail sensor on the high ridge, 11 miles north. It was mostly white. In the middle of the white, there was a shoulder. Just a shoulder and part of a striped flank filling the entire frame close enough that the fur was individually resolved. Sam frowned. "That is a big male." "That is not a big male," Ellie said. "That is the big male." Walt came over, still holding the wrench, and went very still. "Boone," he said. Dean set down the firewood. "Boone is gone." "Boone has been gone 2 winters. Boone was never gone," Ellie said. "Boone's collar died." "There is a difference, and he has been enjoying it." They had named him after Daniel Boone years back because he had crossed the entire reserve as a young male and kept going. His file said M12. Nobody at the station had called him that in a decade. He was the largest Amur tiger ever measured in that valley. His territory ran to the horizon in 3 directions, and it included, dead center, the field station itself. He had walked past their fuel shed more times than any of them had walked past it. Ellie touched the edge of the display. "He is on his eastern route, ridge, saddle, river bend, back. Same loop he has walked his whole life. If nothing interrupts him, he crosses the lower valley in about 2 days. Sam looked at the frame again. "What happens if something does interrupt him?" Walt screwed the lid back on his thermos. "Son," he said, "you do not handle a tiger. You get out of his way, and you let him finish his rounds." Nobody laughed because he had not been joking. That night at 3:14 in the morning, every instrument in the station lost calibration at once. The dish tower groaned. The trail sensors on 4 ridges all triggered simultaneously with nothing in frame. And out on the eastern ridge in the dark, something enormous came down through the trees, put down a landing leg the size of a grain silo, and settled into 11 feet of snow directly across Boone's route. The Soren landing was, by their own standards, flawless. 3 heavy landers came down along the ridge in a line, 92 ground personnel deployed in under 4 minutes. Perimeter beacons went out to 200 meters, glowing pale blue in the dark. And by dawn, the compact had established a forward survey post inside a biosphere reserve, without a single alarm being raised anywhere on the planet. Then the sun came up and they discovered the temperature. "Overseer," Sub-Overseer Tarn reported, "ambient is -40. -40 what?" "Both, Overseer." "That is the one place where the human scales meet. They find it amusing." Draven, standing at the base of the ramp in field armor, was not amused. His armor was rated for combat, not for this. The joints had gone stiff in 11 minutes. His faceplate had frosted over from the inside twice, and each time it had helpfully informed him that the fault was environmental. Around him, 92 Saurans were learning what every first winter learns. Metal takes skin. Fingers stop working before you notice. Breath freezes on everything it touches, including the inside of your own gear. Trooper Nim had already lost a glove seal and was standing very close to a heat exchanger with the expression of a soldier reconsidering his enlistment. Handler Vosk came down the ramp last, and he came down it slowly because he was leading something. The Dreeg was 4 meters long, low to the ground, armored in overlapping plates the color of wet slate, and built entirely for one purpose. The Soren Compact had used Dreeg to take apex specimens on 19 worlds. It had never failed. At the base of its skull, a small amber light blinked steadily. "Overseer," Vosk said, "the animal is ready." Draven looked at the amber light. "Explain the control unit again for the record." Vosk was very happy to. Handlers always are. The implant does not give orders, Overseer. That is a common misunderstanding. It suppresses. Specifically, it suppresses the fear response entirely at the source. A predator that cannot feel fear will advance into anything. It will not flinch, it will not break, it will not retreat. It obeys because there is nothing left inside it that argues. And the relay? Vosk indicated the command plate on Draven's own chest. Linked to your armor, Overseer. The relay holds the hierarchy. The Dreeg reads the dominant apex signature in range, confirms that it is you, and remains subordinate. It is a very elegant system. It has never once been challenged. Ro, taking notes, wrote down the phrase "never once been challenged," and felt a small cold spot open in his chest that had nothing to do with the weather. 11 miles south, the field station woke up to a sky full of the wrong kind of light. "That is not Aurora," Nora said, standing in the doorway in 3 layers and a bathrobe. Dean was already on the roof. "That is a whole lot of not Aurora." Walt came out with binoculars, looked north for a long time, and then handed them to Ellie without a word. Ellie looked. She lowered them, she looked again. "There are 3 of them," she said. "On the eastern ridge, big, they have cut trees." Sam had gone the color of the snow. "Should we call somebody?" Roy pointed at the dish tower, which was leaning at an angle it had not been leaning at yesterday. "With what?" That was the moment the station understood its situation. They were 400 kilometers from anything, in the middle of a reserve the size of a small country, in a season when the roads did not exist, with 1 snowcat, 2 skidoos, a dying generator, and no way to tell anyone that the sky had opened up. Walt took the binoculars back. "All right, nobody panics, nobody goes north." "That is it," Sam said. "That is the plan. That is the first half of the plan. The second half is coffee." Up on the ridge, the Saurons began their survey, and the survey immediately started producing results that nobody enjoyed. "Overseer," Ro said, "our thermal returns are unusable." "Explain." "The ambient temperature is close to the internal temperature differential our instruments rely on. Every living organism here is insulated to a degree our equipment was never designed for. Everything reads as terrain. Then use motion tracking. The forest is moving, Overseer, all of it." "There is wind," Draven exhaled slowly. "Then we will do it the direct way, deploy the perimeter and wait. Apex predators are territorial. If we occupy his territory, he will come to us." That was the single most correct thing any Sauron said that day, and it was going to cost them everything. Because by mid-morning the perimeter beacons started failing, not from cold, not from sabotage. One by one, at the outer edge, they simply stopped. And when a recovery team went out to the first one, they found it lying in the snow with 4 deep parallel gouges through the housing. The second one was worse. The second one was still standing, and something had rubbed against it hard enough to bend the mounting post 60 degrees, and left a smell on it that made the entire recovery team's respirator filters change color. Tarn reported it personally, and Tarn was not a man who enjoyed reporting things. "Overseer, the beacons were not attacked, they were marked. Marked. Sent marked, Overseer, deliberately. And the claw damage on Beacon 1 is at a height of 2.1 meters on a tree the animal chose to stand against." Draven was quiet. "He is not probing our defenses," Tarn continued. "He is not testing us. He is doing what he does every week. He walked his line, he found new posts on it, and he remarked his boundary." Ro looked up from his notes. "Overseer, I do not believe he has registered us as a threat. I believe he has registered us as furniture." Vosk laughed. It was the last time anybody on that ridge laughed for a while. "Then release the Dreeg," Draven said. "Let us see how much furniture it finds." At the station, Ellie was standing at the map wall with a pencil, and Walt was watching her the way you watch a fuse. She drew a line north along the ridge through the saddle and stopped the pencil right on the spot where the alien landers had come down. "That is his route," she said. "Not near it." On it, Dean leaned in. "So he is going to walk right into them." "No," Ellie said. "They are already standing in the middle of his hallway." "He is not going to walk into them." She set the pencil down. "He's going to come see what they are." They released the Dreeg at the top of the ridge into the trees with the wind at its back. That was mistake 1, and it was a small one, but the taiga charges interest on small mistakes. The wind at your back means your scent goes ahead of you, and in that forest, scent arrives about 4 minutes before you do. Handler Vosk watched the amber light on the tracking board move north, then east, then slow. "He has a line," Vosk said. "He has picked up the specimen." "How long?" Draven asked. "Minutes." It was 14 minutes. Then the amber light stopped moving, and the audio came through the relay, and everybody on that command deck heard something they had never heard before. They heard the Dreeg back up. It did not run. It could not run because the implant would not let it. But the audio caught the sound of 400 kilograms of armored predator shifting its weight backward, again and again and again into a tree, and then along the tree, and then around it. "Vosk," Draven said. "What is it doing?" Vosk stared at the board. "It is trying to withdraw. You told me it cannot withdraw. It cannot. That is why it is walking backward." Then the audio stopped, not violently. There was no roar, no impact, no struggle. There was a long, low sound that a human on that ridge might have described as a cough from inside a mountain. And after that there was nothing but wind and the amber light sitting perfectly still in the snow, 500 meters from where it had stopped moving. They found the Dreeg an hour later. It was alive. It was not injured in any way Vosk could measure. It was lying flat in a hollow with its head down and its plates locked shut, and it would not get up, and when the handler tried to override it. The implant reported that the fear suppression system was operating normally at full output. There was nothing left in it to suppress. It had simply decided at some level the machine could not reach that it was going to stay in that hollow. Tarn crouched by the tracks in the snow beside it. They came in from the east, circled the hollow once at a distance of about 9 meters, and left to the north without hurrying. The stride length did not change anywhere along that circle. "Overseer," he said quietly, "it walked around ours, it did not attack it, it looked at it and it kept going." Draven's voice came back flat. "Bring the animal in. And find me that specimen." Down at the station they had a different problem, and it was the good kind. Roy had found something in the snow at the south fence, and he had brought it inside on a shovel, and now it was sitting on the workshop bench thawing into a puddle. It was a Soren field unit about the size of a lunchbox with a cracked housing and a dead amber lamp on top. "That fell off something," Roy said. "Or something threw it." Sam poked it with a screwdriver and jumped when it clicked. Ellie leaned over it. "It is a handler unit." "How do you know that?" "Because it has a strap, a shoulder pad, and a shape somebody designed to be carried by a person who is walking behind an animal. Everything about it says leash." Roy went to work with hose clamps, a soldering iron, and the total absence of fear that comes from having no idea what you are touching. It took him 5 hours. At the end of 5 hours, the cracked display lit up, and it was in a language nobody knew. And under that language there was a simple graphic that everybody understood immediately. A silhouette of an animal, a line running from its skull to a small icon of a chest plate, and a single indicator bar filling steadily, labeled with one symbol. Ellie stared at it for a long time. "Nora," she said, "come look at this and tell me I am wrong." Nora came and looked and did not tell her she was wrong. "That is a suppression curve," Nora said. "I have seen that shape 1,000 times. That is a sedative dose graph, except it is running continuously, and it is not sedating the animal, because the animal is clearly still functional." She tapped the little skull icon. "Whatever that is, it is turning something off and holding it off, permanently." Dean folded his arms. "Turning what off?" Ellie answered slowly because she was getting there as she said it. "They are not training their animal. They are removing something from it, and an animal in a forest only really has one thing worth removing." She looked up. "They took its fear away so it would go anywhere they pointed it." Walt set his thermos down. "That is a clever thing to build," he said, "and a stupid thing to depend on." Sam did not follow. "Why? Because a machine like that has to have something to grab," Walt said. "It works by taking fear out. If it ever meets something that never packed any, it has got nothing to hold." Nobody said anything for a second. Then Ellie went to the map wall. "Say that again," she said. Walt said it again. She was already drawing, because there was a second thing on that display, and it had been bothering her since the lamp came on. Below the suppression bar was a second indicator, smaller, and it was not a bar at all. It was a comparison. 2 silhouettes side by side, one marked, one not. And a line between them that read in symbols anybody in that room could interpret which one is above the other. "It is not just suppressing," she said. It is ranking, that is a hierarchy check. It is constantly asking who is the dominant animal in range, and it needs the answer to be their handler, or it does not know what to do. Dean leaned in. And if the answer is not their handler, then it has to resolve it, Nora said, and the only way it can resolve anything is by suppressing. And it cannot suppress an animal it is not plugged into. Sam looked between them. So what happens? Ellie put the pencil down on the ridge, exactly where 3 landers were sitting in 11 feet of snow. Directly across a route that a 900-pound animal had been walking his entire adult life. I do not know, she said, but I would very much like to be somewhere else when we find out. Outside, the wind changed direction. And on the ridge at the north end of the Sauron perimeter, in ice fog so thick that a soldier could not see the man beside him, Trooper Nim heard snow compress under something heavy. About 9 feet to his left, and realized his rifle had frozen to his glove. Trooper Nim did not move because he could not. His rifle had frozen to his glove. The ice fog had cut visibility to about 4 meters, and 9 feet to his left, something very large had just put its weight down in the snow and left it there. He heard it breathe. That was the part he would never be able to describe properly afterward. It was not a growl. It was just an animal breathing out slowly, close, at a volume that suggested a chest the size of a fuel drum. Then it moved past him, and it did not hurry. North line, hold, Tarn said over the command band, and every Sauron on that ridge heard the strain in it. All positions hold, do not fire. Boone walked the length of the Sauron perimeter. He came out of the fog at the first position, and passed within 6 meters of 2 troopers who were pressed flat against a supply crate, and he did not look at them. He passed the second position, where a squad had formed a firing line, and every barrel tracked him, and not one of them so much as flicked an ear in return. He passed a heat exchanger and paused once for about 2 seconds, because it was warm and he was curious, and 42 Sauron soldiers stopped breathing in unison. He passed the third position. The fourth, the fifth. Rowe, listening to the reports come in one after another from the command deck, understood something that made his stomach turn over. He was not stalking them. He was inspecting them. At the 6th position, he stopped. The 6th position held the specimen capture rig, a low sledge stacked with restraint cabling, a collapsible containment frame. And the sedation array the compact had built specifically for an animal of his mass. Boone looked at it for a long moment. Then he turned, put his shoulder against the nearest landing leg of the primary lander, leaned his full weight into it, and rubbed the length of his flank down the metal from top to bottom. He scratched 4 deep parallel gouges into the leg at a height of about 7 feet. He turned around, he backed up to it. And then he walked north into the fog, and the fog closed behind him, and he was gone. There was a very long silence on the command band. "Sub-Overseer," Draven said at last. "Report," Tarn's voice was completely flat. "Overseer, the specimen has claimed our vessel." "Say that again?" "He has marked the primary lander. He has clawed a boundary mark into the landing leg. Overseer, by every behavioral standard in our own survey data, he has just filed our ship as a feature of his territory." Rowe, very quietly, wrote it down. Draven stood at the rail for 11 seconds. "Deploy the deterrent line," he said, "full emitters across the northern approach. If he will not be frightened by soldiers, he will be frightened by frequency. And bring the Dreeg back up. Reset the implant to maximum output and hold it at the relay." Vosk hesitated. "Overseer, at maximum, the suppression is permanent. The animal will never feel fear again." "Good." 11 miles south, Ellie Marsh was standing at the map wall with a pencil, and she had gone very still. "They put something up on the north saddle," she said. Sam looked at the sensor logs. "There is a signal on the ridge. It is loud. It is not any band I know." Nora leaned over his shoulder. "That is a wildlife deterrent. It has to be. Ultrasonic high-output wide arc. We use tiny versions of those to keep bears off a cache." Dean frowned. "So they are trying to scare him off?" "No," Ellie said. "They are trying to steer him. Look at the arc." She traced it on the map. The emitter line did not cover the landing site. It covered everything except one corridor, and that corridor ran north around the saddle, down a gully, and into a natural bottleneck between 2 rock faces where the snow was chest deep, and there was no exit. "That is a funnel," Walt said. That is a trap, Ellie said. They are going to push him off his own route and walk him into a hole. Sam looked up. So we stop him from going north. We cannot stop him from doing anything, Sam. Nobody can. That is the entire point of him. Ellie put the pencil down on the emitter line. We do not steer him. We just take their hand off the wheel. Walt got it first. He got it about a full second before anybody else, and he set his thermos down, which at that station was the equivalent of an alarm going off. You want to kill their emitters, he said. I want to knock out enough of them that the funnel collapses. If the deterrent line goes down, he does not go north around the saddle. He does what he has done every single week of his life. He walks his eastern route through the ridge straight down the middle. Ellie tapped the map, and their landers are sitting on it. Dean looked at the distance. That is 6 miles of open ridge in 40 below. 5.5, Roy said, and the snowcat has enough fuel for 1 run out and 1 run back. And that is if nobody gets clever. Nora checked the light. And we have about 7 hours of daylight. After that you are moving in the dark at 40 below, and I would like to say for the record, as the only medical professional in this building, that I hate every part of this. Noted, Dean said. I am not finished hating it. Also noted. Walt looked around the room at 5 people who were, by any reasonable measure, entirely the wrong people for this. All right, he said. Roy and Sam on the emitters. Dean drives. Nora stays here with the radio and the stove. Ellie and I go up to the overlook and watch the line, because if he changes his route, somebody has to know before the rest of you are standing in it. Sam swallowed hard. And if we get up there and one of them is looking right at us, Walt pulled his hood tight. Then you remember what I told you, son. You do not handle a tiger and you do not handle an army either. You get out of his way and you let him finish his rounds. The snowcat went out at 9 in the morning, into a wind that took the temperature down another 11 degrees. And the fuel gauge started falling the moment the tracks began to turn. The first emitter was mounted on a tripod at the edge of the tree line, and Roy killed it with a hose clamp and a crescent wrench in under 90 seconds. That is not how you disable alien technology, Sam said. That is how you disable a tripod, Roy said. The technology is fine. It is just lying down now. The second one took 11 minutes because it had a heater and the heater had melted a bowl of ice around the base, and Roy went into that bowl up to his knee. The third one they took out by driving the snowcat into it, which Dean described as a controlled tactical impact, and Roy described as the reason they were now leaking coolant. By the fourth emitter, the Sarans had noticed. Overseer, we have movement on the deterrent line. The specimen? No, Overseer. Tarn sounded almost relieved to be reporting something normal. A tracked ground vehicle, local manufacture, 3 occupants. They are dismantling our emitters. With what? There was a pause while Tarn magnified the feed. Hand tools, Overseer. Draven turned slowly. The native inhabitants are removing compact field equipment with hand tools. Yes, Overseer. And one of them appears to be recording the serial numbers. That was Sam, who had been raised by 2 accountants and could not help himself. Send a squad. They sent a squad, and the squad got 400 meters down the ridge before it discovered the thing every Sauron on that mountain was about to discover. Which is that at 40 below, a soldier in powered armor has roughly 40 minutes of comfortable function, and then begins negotiating with his own body. The squad came back. The snowcat kept going. By 1 in the afternoon, 6 of the 11 emitters were down and the funnel had a hole in it a quarter-mile wide. By 2, the light was already going gold and low. And at 17 minutes past 2, on the overlook above the eastern ridge, Ellie Marsh lowered her binoculars and said one word. There, he came down through the saddle on his own route at his own speed, at the exact place she had drawn a line 2 days earlier, and he did not look left or right. On the ridge, Vosk brought the Dreeg up to the relay and locked it in beside Overseer Draven, and the amber light at the base of its skull burned steady and bright at maximum output. Hierarchy holding, Vosk reported. Dominant apex signature confirmed as Overseer Draven. The animal is ready. Then let it take him. The Dreeg did not move. Vosk, it is reading, Overseer. There is a second signature in range. It is running the comparison. Rowe watched the readout. And Rowe, who was small and anxious and extremely good at his job, understood what was about to happen roughly 4 seconds before it happened. and there was nothing he could do with those 4 seconds. Because the relay had one method. It ranked 2 animals by measuring how much fear it had to suppress in each of them, and the one that needed less was dominant. It had done that on 19 worlds. It had never failed. It measured the Dreeg at maximum output with everything in it held down by force. Then it measured the animal walking up the ridge, and it found nothing to hold down. No spike. No suppression required. No fear at all in an animal that had spent its entire life inside a territory that included a diesel generator, a dish tower, floodlights, snowcats, chainsaws, and a group of humans who had never once given him a reason to change his route. The relay asked the question it always asked, which of these is above the other? And the answer came back so far outside its range that it could not resolve it, so it did the only thing it knew how to do. It tried to suppress the second signature. There was no implant on the other end. "Overseer," Rose said, "the relay is looping." Draven looked down at his own chest plate where the golden command symbols were flickering. "Shut it off. Overseer, the relay is the command authority. Every implant, every beacon, every suit regulator on this ridge is subordinate to it. If it drops, they all drop. Then drop them." That was, in fairness, the correct order. It was simply 11 seconds too late. The relay failed all at once. The amber light at the base of the Dreeg's skull went out for the first time in its life, and the enormous armored animal flinched like something struck it, and then, slowly. It lay down in the snow with its head on its forelegs, because it had just discovered fear at 400 kilograms and had absolutely no idea what to do with it. Every perimeter beacon on the ridge went dark, every powered joint locked. And 92 soldiers from a warm world found out simultaneously what -40 degrees feels like when the heater in your armor stops. The Sauron line did not break. It could not break. It simply stopped being a line and became 92 individuals sprinting for a ramp. Boone walked into the middle of it. He did not charge. He did not roar. He came up over the lip of the ridge into a landing site full of running soldiers and stopped, because there was a great deal of noise. And he considered it for a moment with the mild irritation of a very large animal who has found the neighbors making a mess again. Then he walked past the sledge with the containment frame on it, put his shoulder against the same landing leg he had marked the day before, and remarked it. Because someone had been touching his boundary post. Overseer Kel Draven stood 11 meters away in dead armor with his own command plate flickering on his chest, and for the first time in 31 surrenders. He was the only thing on the field that was afraid. The tiger looked at him for about 3 seconds. Then he lost interest and kept walking, and the fog took him. The Sauron compact left the Usheri Taiga 62 minutes later, and they left badly. They left the containment frame. They left 4 emitters, the restraint cabling, a heat exchanger, and a supply crate that Roy would eventually turn into an extremely good workbench. 2 landers got airborne on the first attempt. The third had settled its landing legs 11 feet into snow that had been quietly melting and refreezing under the heat of its own hull for 2 days. And it took them 40 minutes and a great deal of shouting to break it free. Nobody at the field station helped. Walt Brody stood at the edge of the tree line the whole time with his thermos and did not say a single word, which the compact later recorded in its after-action file as an unidentified psychological pressure of local origin. Trooper Nim was the last one up the ramp. He had lost a glove, a rifle, 1 boot seal, and most of his opinions. He was wearing, over the top of his dead armor, a gray wool blanket that a mechanic had thrown at him from a passing snowcat without slowing down, and he had refused to take it off. He was still wearing it 3 weeks later. His squad leader eventually stopped asking. Handler Vosk carried the Dreeg up the ramp himself, and that was the part that surprised everyone aboard. The animal walked, slowly shaking with its plates loose and its head low, but it walked, and for the first time in its recorded life it walked beside him instead of ahead of him. Vosk filed a request that it never be reimplanted. It was approved without discussion, which almost never happens. At the station, the snowcat came in at dusk with a cracked radiator, an empty tank, and 3 people who could not feel their faces. Nora met them at the door with hot water and an expression that could strip paint. "Fingers," she said. "All of them now." Dean held up both hands. 10. I counted on the way back. You counted wrong twice because you were talking. That is true. Sit down, Holloway. He sat down. He did not stop grinning, and she did not stop scowling, and Sam looked between the two of them and decided, with the wisdom of a man in his first winter, to say absolutely nothing about it to anybody. The next morning was clear and very cold, and the station did what it always did, because that was the only thing it knew how to do. Roy fixed the radiator with a hose clamp. Walt lost another argument with the generator. Nora rebuilt her tranquilizer kit. Dean carried firewood and narrated it. And Sam Prout, who 3 days earlier had been the most frightened person in the building, went out alone before the light came up to service the trail sensors on the south fence, and came back with cold hands and a completely different walk. You go out there by yourself? Walt asked. Yes. Any trouble? Sam thought about it. No, somebody had already been through, tracks along the fence line heading east. Whole thing was already checked. Walt nodded once and went back to his generator and did not tell him that this was the highest compliment the valley had to offer. Far out beyond the reach of any of it, Overseer Kell Draven stood before the Sorin Board of Record. The board did not deal in glory, it dealt in filings. They asked him one question. You withdrew from an unoccupied forest. I withdrew, Draven said. From an occupied one, that was the error. We surveyed for heat and we found none, so we recorded it as empty. It was not empty. It was simply full of things that had learned to keep their heat inside. He entered the amendment himself, which had never been done by an overseer of his rank. It runs to 8 lines and the compact still teaches it. Do not survey a cold world with warm instruments. Do not assume that quiet ground is empty ground. Do not use a species' own published research as a target list, because a species that publishes everything is a species that is not hiding anything and has never needed to. Do not deploy the Dreeg against an apex organism that has no fear to remove. Do not place equipment across an established territorial route. Do not mistake indifference for weakness. Do not stand in a doorway for 2 days and then be surprised when the owner comes home. And do not, under any condition, plan an operation in a place where the ambient temperature can end you faster than the wildlife can. A junior counselor raised a hand. Overseer, what was it? The specimen, was it a defensive asset, a guardian organism? Draven was quiet for a moment. It was a cat, he said. It was one animal, and it was not defending anything, and it never once attacked us. It walked its route. It found new posts on its boundary, and it remarked them. Our machine could not frighten it, because our machine works by taking fear out, and it had never brought any. He looked up at the bench. We built a lever with nothing to pull on. And the local inhabitants? 6 of them, Draven said. They removed our equipment with hand tools. They did not attack us. They did not warn us. They simply took our hand off the animal and stepped back. He paused. I do not think they were fighting us at all. I think they were being polite about it. The board marked the world. Then it marked one valley inside it in red. Back on the ridge, the snow filled in the tracks within a week, the way it always does. The gouges in the melted patch, where the landers had sat, stayed a while longer, and then those went too. That spring, when the collaring season came around, the reserve office sent up a new unit with a fresh battery, and a note asking for M12 to be relocated and fitted at the earliest opportunity. Ellie Marsh read the note twice, put it in the drawer, and wrote back that the animal in question had not been located. Walt looked at her over the top of his mug. That is a lie. That is a field observation, Ellie said. I have not located him, he locates me. Walt thought about it and decided it held up. She never did collar him again. Nobody at that station ever tried. Every few weeks a trail sensor on the high ridge would catch a shoulder, or a flank, or nothing at all but a line of prints 40 inches apart, running east along the fence, unbroken. At the same steady pace they had always been. And when new people came up for their first winter and asked what they should do if they ever met him out there in the trees, they always got the same answer. Because it was the only one that had ever been true. You do not handle a tiger. You get out of his way and you let him finish his rounds. If you enjoyed this one, drop a comment and tell me the moment that got you, the perimeter walk, the landing leg, or the machine that had nothing to hold. Share it with somebody who thinks the cold is empty. And subscribe, because there is another quiet place out there waiting for someone to park in the wrong hallway.